Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us from Isolation to Connection, Reimagining Aging in Canada, which is a webinar that is part of our Seniors Loneliness Awareness Week, hosted by GenWell, Canada's Human Connection Movement. I'm Bobbie, and I am the Director of Programs for Seniors and Communities here at GenWell. And we're a national charity focused on educating, empowering, and catalyzing people in Canada to better understand their social health so that they can be more proactive about building the connections that will keep them happy and healthy as they age, so that we can collectively address the growing issues of social isolation, disconnection, and loneliness through the power of human connection. Now, I'm sure as many of you know by now, our social health and our human connections are not just a nice to have. They are literally a critical pillar of our health and wellness across the lifespan. Particularly here in Canada, we know that loneliness among older adults is increasingly recognized as a serious public health issue, with research suggesting that roughly over a half of older adults in Canada right now are experiencing some degree of loneliness. And we know that loneliness, especially in older adulthood, is linked to poor physical and mental health, including increased risk for things like dementia, stroke, diabetes, and even premature death, which is why Seniors Loneliness Awareness Week was launched and is taking place June 15th to 21st this year. Our theme is One Connection Can Truly Change Everything. And the week is about making it easier for people to say hello, share a coffee, go for a walk, or join in an activity with an older adult, whether that's a neighbor, a family member, or someone they just met through community programs. And as we said, that is more important than ever today when we know the fact that older adults are at increased risk for social isolation, for loneliness, and in general are desiring more connection and support in their communities. So today's panel is really about talking about what it takes to move from awareness of this issue and the loneliness that is facing older adults to action and focusing on building the connections that are going to keep us all healthy and happy as we age. So we're going to chat a little bit about what loneliness looks like in later life, what it's like working on the ground right now, what we know is working, where there's some gaps that we can fill, and more importantly, how all of us as individuals, as caregivers, as communities, and systems can foster more meaningful connection as we age. And joining us for this conversation are three leaders whose organizations really truly sit at the heart of this work. So thank you for being here and for the work that you and your organizations are doing each and every day to support older adults, caregivers, and the service providers that are really serving the older adult population. So to start us off, I'd really love to ground people in the work that each one of you and your organizations are doing. So we're going to go around and I'd ask for each of you to introduce yourself, your organization, and share a little bit more about how your work connects to seniors' loneliness and social connection, and why this issue feels especially urgent right now. And I'd love to maybe start off with you, Bette.
Thanks so much, Bobbie, and thanks for this opportunity to be on the panel. My name is Bette Watson-Borg, and I'm located in the Halifax area, and I'm the project manager for the Canadian Coalition for Seniors Mental Health, which I will shorten to CCSMH very quickly. I'm responsible for leading the project to research, write, and mobilize the recent guidelines on social isolation and loneliness in older adults. And CCSMH, if you're not aware, is a nonprofit, a national nonprofit that was founded in 2002 when 65 organizations, mental health organizations, came together and said, we think that we can move the needle on mental health and aging if we collaborate more, share information, do things together. So that's when the coalition was born in 2002. And since then, CCSMH has been very focused on research and writing clinical guidelines on a diversity of topics related to mental health and aging. And the social isolation and loneliness guidelines that were launched in February of 2024 really bring this topic that we're talking together to action, from evidence to action. So that's a little bit about how CCSMH is connected to this particular topic that we're sharing today.
Thank you so much for being here, Bette, and for all the amazing work your organization is doing, especially in developing those clinical guidelines that are really supporting other service providers to really screen for these issues and support with getting people the connections that they need and deserve. I'd love to hop over to you, Amy.
Sure. My name is Amy Coupal. I'm the CEO of the Ontario Caregiver Organization. We support Ontario's 4.2 million caregivers. These are family members, friends, and neighbors who are caring for someone around their physical or mental health needs. And we certainly know that caregivers face higher rates of loneliness and isolation, regardless of where they may be in the lifespan in their own caregiving journey. So this is particularly exacerbated for older adults who are in those caregiving roles, where their caregiving responsibilities may make it harder to maintain and cultivate social connection, existing relationships, connections within the community. And so this is something we're particularly interested in and working on with caregivers around opportunities to have those connections in ways that make sense for them with their caregiving roles and responsibilities, and definitely ties in with our overall interest in that holistic sense of wellness for a caregiver so that they're able to continue to provide care and be able to do so in balance with their own health needs and goals and responsibilities in their lives.
I love that. Thank you so much for being here, Amy. I love the work you guys are doing for caregivers. And I love how you mentioned, it's across all ages because we know caregivers can be any age. And so really welcoming them into the conversation, and particularly that intersection of being a caregiver and an older adult at the same time and the complexities that brings as well. And finally, Sathy, I'd love if you could introduce yourself and your work.
Thanks, and thanks for the invitation, Bobbie and the GenWell team. So I'm Sathy Rajan. I'm the Vice President of Mission at Parkinson's Canada. So Parkinson Canada supports the over 120,000 Canadians who are living with Parkinson's across the country, as well as their care partners, their families, and their support networks. Obviously, because Parkinson's mostly affects older adults, seniors' loneliness is a major issue for us, but then that's exacerbated by the condition that people are facing. With Parkinson's, loneliness often stems from the reduced mobility, the loss of the ability to drive, for example, eventually, or speech changes, self-consciousness in public because of tremors. And we do work across this space. So my role involves oversight of our research portfolio, advocacy, but also our direct programming work. And as part of that direct programming work, we do things like support groups, which are peer groups across the country, and indirectly supporting organizations that are doing work to connect seniors to activities such as exercise programs and dance programs as well, essentially building that resilience in the community. And happy to talk about all of this today. Really excited.
It's amazing. Thanks for sharing, Sathy. And I love that piece you brought in around loneliness really being impacted by changes in physical health. I know when I was working in the retirement homes, I saw this often where, someone might have a change in their hearing, or they've gone through a serious illness or injury that's made them more self-conscious or changed, how they can even speak or hear people. And, it just shone a light to me on how much these health changes can impact our ability to show up and connect with others, and how it can be really an invisible cause of loneliness that we don't always immediately think about, but can really impact people's quality of relationships. And so I love the work your organization is also doing, kind of building those programs and those community supports to reconnect people to those, different forms of social support we need to really thrive and be well. So next, I'd really love, now that we've kind of chatted a little bit about the amazing organizations and the different work you guys are doing in this space, to really chat a little bit more about what loneliness actually looks like in later life. So I'd be curious, and we'll go around, and I'd love to hear from each of you what your perspective is on how does loneliness actually show up for older adults, and what are some of the biggest barriers when it comes to preventing older adults from feeling connected. And maybe Sathy, I'll throw it back to you because I think you were like really just starting to speak on that piece really, really well.
Yeah. The one thing I would say is we just came from a staff retreat last week where we had this incredibly inspirational talk from an individual named Lloyd Taylor, who left us with a message, which was one sentence, which is "Don't let us hide," right? Which I think encapsulates what happens to individuals and their care partners when they have this diagnosis of having Parkinson's disease. I think there's a shift in your context, in your condition, and that causes a retreat in many cases. We just ran a survey where we learned that 60% of the survey respondents had stopped or significantly reduced their hobbies and their leisure activities. So that changes your social dynamic and starts to bring out these issues related to loneliness. So this isn't a withdrawal by choice, it's by circumstance. And those circumstances are also shaped by feeling a lack of connection with individuals whom you may have previously felt a connection with, right? There needs to be an understanding of your current situation. And so that action of trying to expand your social connection group is incredibly difficult for anyone, let alone anyone within a situation like having been recently diagnosed with Parkinson's. I would also just like to underscore that it's not just about the individuals themselves, but we talk about persons affected by Parkinson's, which includes family members, care partners, and others who are part of that care journey. And 100% the loneliness also shows up for that group because you now have this change in circumstances and social connection. One final point I would make is the fact that we're seeing through our data now that some of these issues are exacerbated in, of course, this makes sense, in rural areas, in situations where there's financial constraints. So you may not have the means to pay out of pocket for certain activities. And that's a real consideration we need to think about as a community as we work together.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing those like nuanced layers of where people are living, financial constraints. And again, I loved how you said, don't let us hide. And that concept of, again, I see a lot of people who are struggling. Again, it might be health changes, it might be shrinking social circles, loss of a loved one, you name it. And the kind of, I think, very natural responses to like retreat within and the impact that'll have on our connections, which we know impacts our health and wellness. So really appreciate you bringing that kind of piece in and offering that kind of reflection of, what are ways, if we're going through those kinds of changes, or we know people who are going through those kinds of changes, that we can support kind of gently coming back out of the shell, or supporting someone to come back out of the shell and find those ways to connect that feel meaningful and also kind of safe and comfortable as you're moving through like a really big internal process. I'd love to maybe go to you, Amy, and see how this is impacting, caregivers at large and especially older adult caregivers.
Yeah, I would love to build on some of the points actually that Sathy just made, because these are the kinds of things we hear from caregivers all the time. There is something that happens in that caregiving dynamic that really can change people's social dynamics overall, right? One is that sometimes caregivers don't feel like they can share the details or the uniqueness of their own experience. So that creates a little bit of a barrier with other people in their lives, either, their current social network, but also broader members of the community or other people that they may interact with. And that's reinforced sometimes in either sort of self-enforced stigma or stigma that can come from other people about, oh, but what if, and I can't imagine, or, how are you managing, and all of those kinds of things where sometimes it's easier for caregivers to withdraw. And we hear that regularly. You know what? I just don't want to have this conversation. I don't want to have to manage questions, expectations, any of those kinds of things. And so it's easier for me to pull back. That's one thing that can be very common for caregivers. I will also just add the dreaded statement of, let me know what I can do. because this is a very difficult thing for caregivers to hear. It actually adds to that mental load of, oh, now I have to think about something for you to do too, right? So I often say to people who are looking to connect with a caregiver, pick something that you know you can do and offer that up. I would love to shovel your snow. I would love to bring you a meal once a week. I would love to do something practical for you. And then that person just needs to say yes or no. And it may or may not be a visit. It may or may not be a social connection. But even if you're dropping off a cup of coffee, sometimes that quick connection at the door or in passing can be super meaningful for people. And so there are some of these practical challenges that caregivers are facing. Their time may be much more limited. They may be balancing work and care even in older adulthood in order to support the cost of caregiving. And they may be managing that perhaps with their own health issues or other responsibilities in their lives. So the volume of things that's going on may make social connection feel practically more difficult or emotionally more difficult, where it's just one more thing to have to navigate and figure out and talk about. But what we do know is that caregivers benefit from social connection. We know that for sure, that can make such a big difference in terms of reducing the sense of loneliness and isolation. And I would throw in a plug for connections with other caregivers. This is why caregivers really benefit from and value things like peer support, whether that's a one-to-one peer mentor or a peer support group. These can be amazing opportunities for caregivers to have social connections in a new way that might feel relatable with their caregiving experience. Not always the case, but it's another pathway for that social connection.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Amy, and for the really amazing little tidbits of what people can do. I think it's so relatable. I know when I'm like struggling and been like trying to take care of lots of people and lots of different things, the last question I ever wanted was, let me know what you can do, because it is really stressful. So I love that piece of finding how you can contribute. And helping in that way, because I don't think we think about what a difference that makes. Like we have a member of the team who is a caregiver and speaks very openly about that. And one of the things we try to do when things get really intense for her is I'm always like, if there's emails you're getting this week that, are just too overwhelming for you, shoot them my way and I'll deal with them, or like vice versa. And again, it seems so little and it doesn't seem like that would be a big way of socially connecting, but at the time it's huge when people need that support, if you can take that little thing off of their shoulders. So I love you bringing that in. I'd love to pass it over to you, Bette, and see definitely what you guys are noticing in the data or in clinical practice when it comes to seeing how loneliness presents, who's at risk. Yeah. Oh, you're muted, Bette.
I'm so immersed in listening to my fellow panelists. I'll jump into this. So yeah, just to recap, CCSMH, our primary audience are healthcare and social service professionals, which is a really vast, diverse audience. And that being said, everything we do, including our clinical guidelines, we try to write and present and disseminate so that anybody, including older adults themselves, their family members, their care partners, are very accessible to that. But that we do have a lane around healthcare and social service professionals. So one of the things that comes up for us regularly when we're looking at like, how does loneliness manifest itself? How does it show up? I think the number one thing I'd like to share around that is that it shows up differently for absolutely every single person. It's similar to our personality, how we take in our life journey and our experiences, and then how things like social health manifest themselves. It's going to be unique and different for absolutely every person. So where that leads us to is how important it is not to make assumptions about if somebody is lonely or socially disconnected, or that they are fine. So it's the whole, how can we move from assumptions, and building on Amy, what you said, it's that kind of the opening the can of worms and just saying, do I go there or do I not go there? Because being afraid of the unknown and being afraid of what might happen if I ask a question, if I start to explore this. So the not making assumptions is a really important thing. The other thing we found super helpful, and clinicians have given us this feedback, is in our guidelines, we put social isolation and loneliness together kind of in a heading. However, really important to understand that they are connected often, however, they are different experiences. And this is where the assumptions piece comes back in, that we can be socially isolated and be fine. We can be comfortable in our own company. We enjoy reading. We love nature. We involve conversations with one other person, etc. We're not looking for the whole group thing. And the other side of that is we can be lonely within a crowd. It could be our family, it could be a group of neighbors or friends, and still feel that sense of loneliness. So it kind of ties back, not kind of, it really ties back to, we don't want to be making assumptions about whether a loneliness is present or not. And probably the best thing is, how can I, either with myself or how can I with a loved one or friend or family, etc., how can I begin small step to engage in a conversation about social health? That's why some of your ideas, Amy, about, you know, what are some things I already like to do that I might invite someone to be part of? So I'm not adding a burden to myself, and yet I'm offering myself. It's a warm touch, and see what happens, and be okay if nothing happens the first time. So those would be some things that have been coming up in our work.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing, Bette. I think you made some really key points there, particularly around breaking up what is social isolation, disconnection, and loneliness. I know we teach about this a lot at GenWell, and particularly helping people understand that social isolation is where we really have few people around us that we can connect with, versus disconnection. And that piece you were kind of talking about is like, we kind of describe disconnection as that sense of not feeling like we belong or we're accepted in the group. And we tend to define loneliness as that not feeling like our needs are being met in relationship, or that we're happy with the quality of the relationships that we have. And I know I always find this really interesting, that the research tends to point to really that quality of our relationships piece, and subjectively, do we feel happy in our relationships? Because research shows that you may only have 1 to 2 close people around you, but if you feel subjectively very happy with those relationships, you could actually score and have better social health than someone who has, you know, lots of people around them and seem very socially connected, but aren't actually happy in their relationships. And so I've always found that really, really interesting, seeing that dynamic. And I love that piece you're bringing in around and being curious and being open to have these conversations, and finding ways to invite people in to solutions and practices that feel really realistic for us, and also feel like a warm welcome, as opposed to like, you know, sometimes I think, especially when we're talking to older adults around like loneliness and isolation and things, we kind of make it a like you problem, and like you need to deal with this because it's your health and your whatever. And I think that kind of misses the point, which is, yes, it's important to understand loneliness and how loneliness impacts us, but it's more important to talk about the solutions and focus on how do we actually get connected in meaningful ways, because that feels fun and opening and warm and welcoming. Whereas just talking about loneliness, like no one really wants to talk about it or admit they're feeling that way, but everyone will kind of put their hand up when they're like, oh yeah, I like hanging out with people. I like dogs. I like, you know, going for walks in nature or whatever it is. So really appreciate you bringing that piece. And I think it lends really well into this next piece that we're going to talk about, which is really actually talking about the solutions and what makes a difference and how we can support older adults in being more connected. So with that, I'd love to move to our next question, which is, what have you seen that's truly has made a difference in helping older adults feel more connected, whether you know that's specific programs, partnerships, or simple everyday actions? And I'd love, again, Bette, maybe I'll pass it to you, and I'd love to hear kind of your thoughts on this.
Yeah, well, CCSMH is not a direct delivery of service organizations. We kind of in the background doing research and writing and then dissemination of our content. And so one of the kind of key pieces that came out of our research on these guidelines was the importance of, I'll call it co-design or co-creating. So important that regardless of whether we're an organization providing services or we're helping support someone in being more socially connected, that it's co-created, and that it's not us doing it to, doing it for, doing it on or over, that there needs to be that partnership. Sometimes it might be a little bit weighted in one way or the other way, but the more the older adult can be the leader, the guide, they're the subject matter experts in their own life. And again, supporting them and exploring what has meaning for them, what are they interested in, what would they like to do, what were some things they, that exploration and the curiosity is, I think, where we can support older adults the most, so that they become the driver, the leader, the steerer of the social health journey. So that's what's come out of our research, and also engaging with older adults, focus group style things like that. It comes out even stronger when you're engaging and talking to older adults themselves. So I'm being a bit of a voice for older adults, but I can share that when older adults share their opinions about this, absolutely. Even co-create might be a little bit too partnery. It might be, I'm the leader, I'm going to do this. But somehow everyone benefits from a little bit of a helping hand or some curiosity, or someone offering to shovel their snow occasionally. So that would be the big takeaway from our learning so far on that question.
I love that. Thanks for sharing, Betty. I think that really speaks to that kind of concept of person-centered care, and that
Totally.
we each know ourselves the best. And, we know, and people have talked about this, like people fall on different scales when it comes to introversion, to extroversion, to what they're actually interested in doing and not doing. Some people one-on-one is great. Other people really love groups. So I love that piece you're sharing of, how can we really let people lead with actually figuring out what they like to do and what they want. I know whenever I'm speaking to older adults, because I get the question a lot of like, how do I make new friendships in my older adult years? And one piece of advice I always give is, what do you actually like to do? What lights you up? Do you like to read? Do you like to cook? Do you like to paint? And figuring out whatever that is and going to those spaces where people are offering those things, and likely you'll meet other people there who are also interested in doing those things. And it's kind of a great way to both like honor your own interests as well as, connect with other people who might also want to do those things as well. So I love you bringing in that piece. I'd love to pass it over to you, Amy, and hear your thoughts on this.
So I would absolutely echo the comments around co-design, and I'll build on that a little bit by talking about service, because I think that one of the ways that people can get more connected to other people and within their community is through acts of service. For caregivers, I am constantly stunned by how many caregivers get involved because of their own lived experience, either sharing their lived experience in certain contexts, participating in, patient family advisory committees, work with organizations like OCO and many others, where they can actually use their lived experience sometimes to influence change in areas where maybe they faced barriers or challenges, so that it can be better for themselves or perhaps other people. So I think service is something that we should not overlook as a possibility for ways to overcome loneliness. I also love this idea that's come through pretty clearly in our conversation today about starting where people are at and looking at what is going to work for them. This is not a one-size-fits-all type of model and journey. And I'll tie that into the idea of aging in place. Aging in place is such a common conversation today. And one of the things that I think we don't talk about enough is whether or not social connection has been factored into aging in place. And I'll just use the example of my dad, who's in his late 80s, who absolutely could have stayed in his home from a practical, physical perspective, and chose to move because he needed more connection. And so he was able to move into a context where he's able to connect with people, make new friends, and have connections that he wasn't able to within his existing home and his existing neighborhood. So I think if we start to look at people in that more holistic way and see them as being part of broader communities where they can contribute, but also perhaps receive benefit through that co-creation of solutions and also activities and social networks, then we see see that these connections are what makes the world go round, right? And there's no expiry date for people on when we value social connection, but also when we can value both our capacities to perhaps contribute and also to receive benefit from those connections in our community.
Wow, I love that, Amy, that piece of giving and receiving in community and how that is, that is like literally the heart of our societies and how we're able to function and move through life is we're all participating, either giving or receiving that care and that support. And it reminds me, there's a documentary we've shown a lot here at GenWell called Join or Die. It's based on Robert Putnam's work on social capital and how important it is for our communities and our overall well-being as human beings, for us to participate in things, to join things. And the whole part of the documentary is like, it's like, I don't care what you do, join a club, join a group, volunteer, sign up for anything, literally anything, whatever you want, just join in something and participate, because it's not only good for your health. And we know, like, the research shows that volunteering is exceptionally beneficial for people who are volunteering, especially older adults. And it's really good for the community. And so I love that piece of how can we all find those ways to participate and join in that feel easy for us and something that's actually enjoyable, and that will also allow us to receive so much in return from those relationships, from that community, and from that sense of purpose and joy that we're receiving as being a part of that piece of service. So that's so beautiful. And I love that. And I'd love to pass it over to you, Sathy.
Yeah, I mean, just recognize that what's been said by both Amy and Bette is like 100% on that. I think I would add, we look at this in three different ways. We've got to increase the awareness of opportunities for connection for people, which means reaching them where they are. So by that, I mean, there's a chance they're not even aware that there's a loneliness issue there within themselves. So just increasing the awareness of that. There's a chance they don't know what exists out there for them to make connections. And so we need to find creative ways to increase awareness, because saying something once, putting it on a website may not be enough, right? We have to think of ways where we're reaching the people who aren't finding their way to that first step of looking for connection. And then the second piece is like finding where those opportunities for connection are, curating them in a way. So we run a program called Care Finder, where we've identified where support groups exist geographically, and being able to make it somewhat seamless for people to say, oh, I live here, can I join this group? And then we try and make a connection between the support group facilitator or peer mentor, as it were, for one-on-one connection. And then the final piece relates to the co-design element, which is we're trying to maximize communities and individuals' potential to run their own programs, whether it's a support group that they want to run, maybe they have a niche topic that they want to delve into with their peers. Maybe they want to run an exercise program or start an exercise group, which is really important for people living with Parkinson's. And so we run something called the Care Fund, which is like geared at creating these mini community initiatives to be able to flourish, because we can't pretend that we know what works for anyone. We can't also assume that we'll know how it's going to work. But if we can find the resources and share the resources with those who are motivated to try and test and run these efforts, then we should be doing that as an organization. And hopefully that allows us to reach more and more individuals to tackle those geographic issues and those financial issues we mentioned earlier.
I love that, Sathy. I love the piece around really finding these creative ways to raise awareness, because, realistically, education around social health is really new. And it's not something that we've been formally educated on as a population ever. And I know from our research, we've really found that, again, probably about 90% of the population, well, like intuitively, they understand how important relationships are. Kind of, I think we all somewhat intuitively get that. we've never actually been educated about the impacts loneliness has on our brains or bodies, or the benefits connection actually has for our physical and our mental health, especially as we age, and what a protective factor it can be for our health and wellness. And I know part of our model, so we always say here at GenWell, we educate, empower, and catalyze. And that was actually based off the behavioral model of change, where we know that people, if they want to make health changes and changes in their behavior, kind of move through a process and awareness, like first understanding that it's an issue for you, and then understanding the context and kind of like what kind of changes need to be made is that first step in terms of making a change in your behavior, particularly with health. So I love that you kind of weaved that in, because I think it's really important that we understand, even just the general process of how do we create meaningful and lasting change in our life, especially if, we're struggling with feeling lonely and we know we need more connection, first recognizing that that's an issue. But then, as you said, figuring out that empowerment piece of, where are the connections that I want? What are the skills maybe I need to approach that, or the resources that I need to make that happen? And then creating that catalytic occasion where we start to really see that change and that shift, and it's something that we start to integrate into our daily lives. And I think this really lends well into this next piece, which is kind of really looking at and speaking about the role that our community's organization and other supports have in kind of building and creating that connection. Because a thread I've really heard today is, the importance of really being intimate in a community and understanding community needs, and letting the community kind of co-create and develop these connection opportunities that actually align and work for them with them, as opposed to this concept of us coming and telling people how they need to connect and what that needs to look like. So I'd love to kind of pose the question to the group and kind of ask, what role can communities, organizations, or specific tools like technology play in strengthening connection for older adults? And I'd love to maybe start with you, Amy, if you want to kick us off.
Sure. I'd love to think outside of the box a little bit on this one. So first is to value micro connections. I want to highlight retail as an example here, because we've seen some great examples where older adults in specific have rebelled against self-checkout because it's the one opportunity that you might have to interact with a human being, and that we should not devalue or under assume what the value of that social connection might be. And actually, I think it's really cool that that's an emergent thing that can happen in communities where people will come together and push back on those kinds of things. So that's one piece that I would call out, is the opportunity to self-organize, but also the opportunity to engage in micro connections. Then I think we need to look at how we strengthen the kinds of organizations and connections that you're talking about, and ensure that they are accessible to everybody. We've come a long way in our conversations about accessibility, but I do think that there's more that we need to do in terms of ensuring that we've reduced the barriers to access or entry, whether that's financial, physical, whatever it may be for people, so that they feel like they can participate, and that participation is not one size fits all. Right? And whether that's around frequency, amount of time that's required, cost of participation, that we have multiple forms of entry and participation in community events, community organizations. I think that's important. For caregivers in particular, where schedules may change regularly and their ability to engage in some of these things might be evolving all the time, it's nice to know that, okay, if I am interested in this activity or feel like I'm a part of this community, that I could show up. And our lives can be so frenetic in lots of different ways, but feeling like we have a safe place to land within these organizations and community events or whatever it might be, I think are really, really important to help people to know, even if you've been away, that there's also an opportunity to come back.
I love that. That's beautiful. I love all the points. Yes to micro connections. And those are simple things that all of us can do as well. And so much yes to figuring out, especially my work with older adults, I find a lot of the barriers to connection are issues with accessibility, issues with like financial constraints, issues with transportation and mobility. And like those are really like some key pieces that I see as something that can be really supportive if we find ways to make things as accessible for everyone. I know I did a workshop for Nova Scotia last year, and they ran a phone service program, which was so beautiful. So people could just call in. And one comment that always stuck with me was there was an older gentleman on the call who had a disability where basically would make him incredibly hard for him to connect with people face to face. And so he said that having these conversations over the phone removed any ability for people to see or experience the disability, and he could just show up completely as himself and have amazing conversations. And he was like, this once a week phone call with this group of people is like such a key lifeline for him. And it really spoke to me about how important that accessibility piece is. So thank you for bringing that. Bette, I'd love to pass over to you.
Yeah, I think I'm going to build on Amy's, the micro connection, and I'll end on the organizational side, but kind of starting with self. And like, what are some different things that and I can say we as older adults, because I think I qualify, we as older adults, what can we be doing? And some of the ideas that we've heard, because joining something there can be a lot of barriers to that. So like, what might be some small steps that we might bring into our routine? And so routine is one of those things. So like, what might be one, for example, like what might be either a television or a radio show that you can tune into every day, where it might be dialogue, it might be conversational, it might be phone and type of thing. So finding some sort of technology-based routine, like The View. There are lots of people that watch The View, for example. So you're logging on and like you start to feel like those, you get to know them, you get to know their personalities, etc. So that's one example of building something into a routine that might be a little bit different, but you might not be facing too many barriers. Other things that we've heard suggested by older adults is if mobility is there and you can get outside, is going for a walk, going to a park, same time. That's when potentially you see some of the same people. If you're an animal lover, you'll see the dogs, you stop and have a conversation. So it's that kind of, it's like there's low commitment to other people, but you're making a commitment to yourself to say, how can I introduce some small things into my routine that will have me meeting other people, being in nature, etc. So those would be some examples for how older adults themselves might take a next step. Moving to the organizational side, I have to do a shout out to the public library system, because public libraries have long since changed from being the place where you go to read books and you can't talk and you can't eat or drink anything in there. They truly are community centers. They are free. Anybody can get a card, and they do so many different services over and above providing books. They have access to free computers. They will teach you, sit side by side in terms of how to use a computer. They do courses, they do presentations, they do lectures. They're beautiful spaces where you can just go and be. So a place that's inside, that's safe, that's welcoming are public libraries. So I think that's if somebody is thinking about how to move out, public libraries would be a great place to try out. So those would be a couple of things coming up for me, coming from self as well as to the organizational context.
I love that. Thanks for sharing, Bette. We have lots of friends in the library system because I think they are one of, not the only, but one of the only true third spaces we have left in our communities right now. And I know across Canada, they are doing so much work to make their space places where people can actually come and connect and engage with one another. As you said, not just like a quiet place to read anymore, but a hub for the communities. So I super love that. And I'd love to pass it to you, Sathy, and see what you think as well.
Yeah, I'll take it from, maybe I'll try and combine this two different ways, the role of an organization and looking at technology. So this morning I was speaking with the team from Dancing with Parkinson's. So dancing turns out is a really important and useful entry point into getting the kind of exercise that's necessary for sort of stemming the progression of Parkinson's disease. And what's interesting, and this won't come as a surprise, is the shift from in-person classes that they were running to hybrid or virtual classes that they now run frequently, in addition to the in-person classes. And it was spurred, of course, by COVID, right? So almost the next day, you know, Zoom links started popping up, and this pattern, I think, emerged quite quickly across the world, where a lot of the older population became very familiar with how to use Zoom or how to use a webinar link to be able to connect. And we did that with no choice, really, right? Like, it was necessity that sparked that. So I think the role of an organization such as Parkinson Canada is to catalyze that effort and spread it as much as possible. So what are we seeing that works in one area? Can we take the lessons learned there and try and spread that model elsewhere where they may be grappling with the same challenges? And we could say, hey, have you tried doing a webinar or a Zoom link for this kind of activity that you've set up? And then I think the other role we have to play as an organization is to think about the future, right? Like, where are we today, and how is the world going to change over the course of the next couple of years, and how do we set ourselves up to be able to support older populations in the years to come? So, you know, when you think about technology today, if you think about a technology with a millennial population or a Generation X population, you're talking about using digital tools, mobile tools, almost as the sort of first point of contact for entry to any sort of information. And then from there to social connection, right? Like social media, like spread this way, including with an older population. So how do we leverage the positive elements of those tools? And I'm thinking about AI, for example, so that we enable social connection and reduce the risks associated with those tools for populations that we're trying to support, while like embellishing what's possible with those tools, right? Is there a micro connection available through this that can be facilitated with AI, for example? Can you use digital tools to help with that nudge factor that's required to get from I really don't feel like leaving the home to I'm ready to make a connection, right? Which is actually a series of steps that's involved there. And so I think it'll fall on organizations like us to try and think of what that looks like and to test various approaches in a safe and comfortable way, so that we're able to support the groups that we work with in the future.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that piece in, Sathy. And I think a really interesting conversation that's going to keep emerging, as we know older adult care is really growing in Canada. We're seeing a bigger boom of it. And for the next generations that continue on, you know, I think those conversations are going to ramp up of how do we use these technologies in a way that supports more connection, and facilitates that, as opposed to things that are actually detrimental to our connection and pull away from that. And it was really interesting when I read your bio, and learning a little bit more about you and the amazing work you've done kind of in that space of helping to learn how to leverage technology to really support people receiving the care and the services that they need. I think it's such an important conversation. So thank you for bringing a little bit of that here. So as we wrap up today, I can't believe it's been almost an hour already. I feel like I could talk to you all day. There's just so many good ideas and things that were shared. I'm going to lead us into the last kind of question, and I think we've touched on some of this a bit already, but I encourage or invite you guys, if there's anything else you want to share in this little piece, feel free to do so. So obviously this whole panel today talking about older adult connection and how do we support being more connected as we age, is part of our Seniors Loneliness Awareness Week, which is an entire week about raising awareness of the issues of loneliness, isolation, and disconnection in older adulthood, and really to inspire people and organizations to take concrete steps to supporting creating more connection for older adults in whatever way makes sense for them. And so a question I would really love to ask you all is, you know, how do you think engaging in a campaign like Seniors Awareness Week, whether that's an individual lens or through kind of a community lens, how do you think it actually helps to address loneliness among older adults, raise awareness? And I'd also love to ask, even though I feel like you guys kind of already answered this a little bit, if there was one action or one piece of advice you'd like to leave people with for Seniors Loneliness Awareness Week as to how they can get more involved and more engaged, what would that be? Sorry, that was a bit wordy. So let me try it again. So how does engaging in this campaign really support to raise that awareness? And, what particular piece of advice or one action that someone could take that you think would really support people through June 15th to 21st as they engage with the campaign? And I'd love, maybe Sathy, we'll start with you.
Well, I think, obviously there's so much work to do over the course of a whole year, but weeks like this really help in catalyzing conversations you probably would have never had, like this one, which I think I've learned from, right? And I'm hoping to reach out to all of you to further the conversation, because my mind's buzzing with opportunities for how we could collaborate and work together. And then that made me think at an individual level that the piece of listening is so critical, just to listen, to understand where you can be involved as an individual, or listen to hear messages like, let me know how I can help, is not particularly useful. I thought that was profound, right? I'm sure I've said it at some point to someone else, and this is a great way to say, well, like, that's something I can change in behavior. And sometimes that listening can be the easiest action you can take with profound effects. So at every level, I would suggest that that's something we should keep in mind, because that's also foundational to something like co-creation, co-design, thinking about data. Everything boils down to being a good listener, because that's where the solutions start.
Thank you, Sathy. I love that. As someone who is also a counselor, I can say, I think the biggest, sometimes I felt like I was doing nothing. I was literally just sitting there listening, and people would talk to me after and they were like, that was so profound. Thank you so much. And you're like, wow, it is just a difference how much just being present with someone and not listening to respond, but just listening to receive them makes such a huge difference for people. And I think it's a rare treat to experience nowadays in the world. So if we can all just listen a little bit more, I'm with you. I think it would make a huge difference. Amy, I'd love to pass over to you.
Well, a couple of thoughts. First, I think for organizations, it's important that we're always thinking about multiple points of entry and multiple pathways for participation. And so, none of this is a one size fits all kind of model. We really need to be thinking about different ways that people may want to or be able to connect, and that we can set up systems, processes, invitations, opportunities for co-creation that allow for that to happen. So that's what I'll say in terms of the organizational perspective. I think one of the benefits you asked about, why does this matter in terms of awareness? Because if we're lucky, all of us will be able to move through this phase of life. And for all of us, it's an opportunity to flex that muscle every day in the way we cultivate our relationships, in the way that we engage with people, whether they're friends or strangers or whoever they are. It's an opportunity for us to actually acknowledge that social connection matters and that our social health matters. And so if we can cultivate that within our own lives and within our own relationships, then we can create more of that ripple effect going out for other people. And so it's an opportunity for all of us to think about, what does my social health look like, and how am I cultivating my own social connection?
I love that. Thank you, Amy. And Bette, I'd love to pass to you.
Yeah, an awareness campaign of this nature, I'm going to circle back to some of your opening comments, Bobbie, is that I think pretty much everybody came out of the pandemic and lockdown who remembers it, understanding what isolation might feel like, and etc. However, it's still not widely known about the physical health impacts of disconnection or unwanted loneliness or isolation, unwanted isolation. So I feel like an awareness campaign like this gets just some of the research out, and Dr. Julianne Holt-Lundstedt and the data point of it's comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Like that's a very powerful message and metaphor that is not difficult to understand. So weeks like this, I think, are really helpful to just bring the research out that's coming out daily about what are the health impacts, because it's somehow we seem to be more attentive, and for sure our healthcare systems seem to be more if there's a primary health care thing rather than that sort of fluffy social health thing that's over there that that's taken care of somewhere else. So I feel this helps bring a much more holistic approach to health. I worked for the YMCA, so spirit, mind, and body comes out very quickly, but the mental health, social health, and physical health, it just brings a more holistic approach to it and makes it much more three legs of the stool rather than 1, 2, and 3 in a priority order. And to the second part of your question in terms of what idea or advice, this isn't my own original one, but someone suggested how it's their clinician and it's changed their conversation when they ask their patient or client, instead of asking how are you, they ask what's important to you these days, or what matters to you these days. Flips the conversation and starts to create an invitation and an opportunity to talk about things that might enter into the space of social health or relationships or family, et cetera. So I'm sharing that on behalf of someone who shared it with us. So
I love that. Thank you for sharing. I'm gonna file that one away. I really like that question. It's really great. Well, thank you all so much for your insights, your thoughtfulness, and just everything you brought to this conversation today. As you guys have all said, and I agree so much, these conversations are so important, and they're just the start. Because we need to have these conversations to raise the awareness, to inspire that change or that action taking. So as we close, I really wanted to bring it back to the heart of this conversation, which is understanding how much loneliness impacts our physical and our mental well-being, especially as we age, but more importantly, to be looking at what we can all do as individuals, as well as organizations, to really support our social health and to support building those meaningful connections that are going to keep us happy and healthy as we age, and that are going to truly benefit our communities and society at a time where we really need each other more than ever before. And so with that, I'm inviting you all to participate in Seniors Loneliness Awareness Week this June, from June 15th to 21st. And our invitation for that week is to really be more intentional about connection, especially with older adults in your lives and communities. So a few concrete steps that I wanted to share with you all today is, number one, to visit lonelinessawarenessweek.ca to learn more about the campaign and also access the tips and tools and different inspiration we have there. And you can figure out ways and find ways to explore more as an individual or as a or as an organization. And in terms of participating during the week, some invitations for you. If you're an older adult yourself, you can attend. We have a free social health webinar coming June 16th that you can sign up for. That'll have more tips and tools for you. I invite you, if you're struggling with loneliness, to find the most gentle way to get out. Maybe you just get out of your house, you smile, you say hello to someone that day. If you're an older adult who is super connected to other people, I invite you to be the connector in your circles and invite people out that week to go for a coffee, go for a walk, get a drink. If you're a younger person, really inviting you to think of any older adult in your life, call them, again, go for a walk, have a coffee, take them out for lunch, whatever it is, the way you want to connect. And if you are an organization, we have lots of tools to actually support connection events during that week, booking social health webinars, and a variety of other things. So again, please visit lonelinessawarenessweek.ca to learn more, to sign up and participate. And again, thank you all so much for being here and for being a part of this conversation today. I think it is so important and one of many. So thank you. Okay. the recording's not going to stop, but we're stopped now. It'll stop when we're done.
And breathe.
Yeah, and breathe. Thank you all so much. That was
That's
so
funny.
nourishing and beautiful. You all just brought such a beautiful energy and just amazing depth to the conversation. And I think this will be so helpful. And I really appreciated that, listening to this conversation, I feel like you could be a younger person, someone who's working in an organization, or an older adult and still find meaning in it, which I really, really appreciate. We will send out, I'll let you guys know once the recording's posted, and for sure we'll tag you on all the socials and everything like that. And really excited for potential collaborations and connections that come out of this for you all as well, because each of your organizations is amazing and doing amazing work. If you have any questions or need anything, feel free to reach out to Carolyn and me on the email chain. And I hope you all have a beautiful rest of your day.
Great. Thanks so much, Bobbie. Great
Thanks,
to meet
Bobbie.
you,
Thanks,
Amy and
everybody.
Sathy.
Thank you.
Take care.
Okay.
Bye.
Take care, everyone. Bye.